War, in its most fundamental form, is an organized and often prolonged conflict, carried out by states or other social groups. It's a most curious and destructive behavior. A declaration of war is a declaration that diplomacy has failed. It's a moment when communication breaks down, and force becomes the language of nations. Throughout human history, these conflicts have erupted for a myriad of reasons. Disputes over land struggles for resources, clashes of ideology, ambitions of powerful leaders. Understanding these events is not simply about remembering dates and battles, it's about understanding the very story of our own species. It reveals our capacity for both extraordinary cruelty and incredible resilience. To delve into the history of war is to witness the evolution of human society itself. We can observe how technology, bronze sword to atomic bomb, catastrophic amplification. These conflicts have carved the very map of our world, defining the identities of countless millions of people. The Trojan War, from the 12th or 13th century BCE, a conflict shrouded in legend. According to Homer's epics, it began with betrayal and divine meddling. Paris abducted Helen. She was the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. In response, a grand coalition of Greek kingdoms formed. The outcome wasn't decided by open battle, but by deception. The Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BCE, Athens, a vibrant democracy with a powerful navy building a maritime empire. Sparta, a rigid militaristic society with the most formidable land army. The clash was one of ideology, ambition, and deep-seated rivalry. It saw plagues, political coups, and brutal sieges. Ultimately, Sparta emerged victorious. They defeated the Athenian fleet at sea. The golden age of Athens came to a calamitous end. The war left Greece exhausted and vulnerable, paving the way for conquest by Macedon. These ancient conflicts set patterns that would echo through history, as new powers rose to challenge the established order. Rome was waiting in the wings. The Punic Wars from 264 to 146 BCE were a series of three monumental conflicts that defined the destiny of the Mediterranean world. A struggle for supremacy between the Roman Republic and the city of Carthage. Carthage in modern-day Tunisia. The Second Punic War is perhaps the most famous, largely due to the genius of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. He achieved the unthinkable by marching an army, complete with war elephants, from Spain over the Alps into Italy itself, where he inflicted a series of devastating defeats upon the Romans. For over a decade, Hannibal rampaged through the Italian countryside, a constant threat to the very existence of Rome. The Roman general Scipio Africanus eventually forced Hannibal to return to Africa to defend Carthage, where he defeated him at the Battle of Zama. Rome was the ultimate victor of the Punic Wars. After the Third Punic War, the Romans utterly destroyed the city of Carthage, famously sowing the ground with salt to ensure nothing would grow there again. The outcome of these wars was nothing short of world-changing. With its greatest rival eliminated, Rome became the undisputed master of the Western Mediterranean. The world we know today, with its legacy of Roman law, language, and architecture, was profoundly shaped by the outcome of this ancient clash of titans. The Hundred Years' War, from 1337 to 1453, was not a single continuous conflict, but rather a long and intermittent series of struggles between two of Europe's greatest medieval powers. The roots of the war were complex, tangled in a web of dynastic claims, territorial disputes, and economic rivalry. The primary cause was a claim by the English kings, most notably Edward III, to the French throne. The early phases of the war were dominated by the English, who achieved stunning victories at Crécy and Agincourt. These battles showcased the devastating effectiveness of the English longbow, a weapon that could decimate the ranks of heavily armored French knights before they even reached the English lines. For a time it seemed as if an English victory and the unification of the two crowns was inevitable. The tide of the war began to turn in a most unexpected way, with the emergence of a young peasant girl, Joan of Arc. Inspired by what she claimed were divine visions, she rallied the demoralized French forces and led them to a pivotal victory at the Siege of Orléans in 1429. Although she was later captured and executed by the English, her actions ignited a powerful sense of national identity and resistance among the French. France's adoption of new technologies, particularly the use of cannons to destroy castle walls, also played a crucial role in the final stages. In the end, France was the victor. By 1453, the English had been expelled from all of their French territories, except for the port of Calais. The American Revolutionary War, which lasted from 1775 to 1783, was a conflict that gave birth to a new nation, and championed radical ideas of liberty and self-governance. The origins of this war lay in growing frustration among the colonists of the 13 American colonies against the policies of the British government, like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act. The colonists protested fiercely, arguing that they shouldn't be taxed by a parliament in which they had no elected representatives. The famous slogan, "No taxation without representation," really captured the core of this political and ideological dispute. The war pitted the 13 colonies, later the United States of America, against the formidable power of Great Britain. The American forces, known as the Continental Army, were led by General George Washington, with the Americans suffering numerous defeats and enduring incredible hardship, like the brutal winter at Valley Forge. A crucial turning point in the war came with the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. This success convinced France, a traditional rival of Britain, that the American cause was actually viable. The war effectively ended in 1781, with the decisive Franco-American victory at the Siege of Yorktown. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially recognized the independence of the United States of America. The outcome was revolutionary, establishing the first major modern republic. The Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815 were an intense and continent-spanning conflict that followed in the wake of the French Revolution. A continuation of revolutionary struggles dominated by the towering ambition of one man, Napoleon Bonaparte. After seizing power in France, Napoleon sought to export the ideals of the revolution and his own authority across Europe. This ambition brought him into direct conflict with the old monarchies of Europe. Napoleon was a military genius, and for nearly a decade his Grande Armée seemed pretty much invincible. He achieved breathtaking victories like Austerlitz and Jena. Those wins let him redraw the map of Europe. He installed his relatives on the thrones of various kingdoms and created a vast French-dominated empire. The beginning of the end was his disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. He led a massive army deep into Russian territory, but the Russians refused to engage in a decisive battle, instead retreating and using a scorched earth policy. The brutal Russian winter, combined with a lack of supplies and constant harassment from Russian partisans, utterly destroyed Napoleon's army. Of the more than 600,000 men who invaded, only a tiny fraction made it back, but his final defeat came at the hands of a British and Prussian army at the Battle of Waterloo. The outcome was the restoration of many of Europe's old monarchies, and the creation of a new balance of power at the Congress of Vienna, and they established Great Britain as the world's leading global power for the next century. World War I, which lasted from 1914 to 1918, was once known as the Great War. It was a global conflict of unprecedented scale and devastation. Its causes were a complex brew of long-term tensions. A rigid system of military alliances divided Europe into two armed camps. The immediate trigger, assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand by a Serbian nationalist in Sarajevo. That event set off a diplomatic chain reaction that pulled nations into war. The war pitted the Central Powers against the Allied powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, France, the British Empire, the United States, a bit later. The war was fought on multiple fronts, but most remembered for trench warfare on the Western Front in France and Belgium. Millions lived and died in horrific trench conditions. Machine guns, heavy artillery, poison gas. Battle of the Somme and Battle of Verdun saw hundreds of thousands of casualties for tiny gains. US entry in 1917 and internal collapse of the Central Powers tipped the balance. Facing economic collapse, a naval blockade, and revolution at home, Germany sued for peace. An armistice was signed on November 11, 1918. The Allied powers were the victors. Over 15 million dead, a lost generation, and deep psychological scars. World War II, from 1939 to 1945, was the deadliest conflict in human history. It was a total war that engulfed the globe and involved more than 100 million people from over 30 countries. The causes were rooted in the unresolved issues of World War I, especially the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany, Italy, Japan. The immediate cause was the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany on September 1, 1939, which prompted Britain and France to declare war. The war was fought between two major alliances, the Axis powers and the Allied powers. The main Axis powers were Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. The principal Allied powers were Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States alongside China and France. The war was fought across Europe, Asia, Africa, and the oceans of the world. Aircraft carriers, jet fighters, and ultimately the atomic bomb. The conflict was also marked by horrific atrocities, most notably the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others by the Nazi regime. In Europe, the German invasion of the Soviet Union stalled at the Battle of Stalingrad, which resulted in the destruction of an entire German army, and marked the beginning of their long retreat. In the Pacific, the Japanese naval advance was halted by the United States at the Battle of Midway. The D-Day landings in Normandy in June 1944 opened a major second front in Western Europe, squeezing Germany between the advancing Soviets in the east and the Western Allies in the west. Germany surrendered in May 1945. After Germany's surrender, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender and the official end of the war. An estimated 70 to 85 million people perished. Much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 was the first major military clash of the Cold War. After World War II, Korea was divided into two zones. The war began in June 1950, when North Korean forces launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. The initial North Korean invasion was highly successful, pushing South Korean and American forces back to a perimeter around the port of Pusan. A daring amphibious landing at Incheon, conceived by U.S. General Douglas MacArthur, cut off the North Korean army and reversed the tide of the war. When UN forces pushed deep into North Korea, nearing the Chinese border, China entered the war directly. The Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975 was another long and divisive proxy war. After defeating the French, Vietnam was temporarily divided between a communist North and an anti-communist South. The U.S. provided massive military support to South Vietnam. The war was a brutal guerrilla conflict fought in dense jungles and rice paddies where identifying the enemy was often impossible. The war became deeply unpopular in the United States, leading to widespread protests. Ultimately, the United States withdrew its forces, and in 1975 North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, reunifying the country under communist rule. The wars in Korea and Vietnam resulted in millions of deaths, devastated the landscapes of both nations, and left deep political and social scars that endure to this day. Our journey through these monumental conflicts reveals a recurring, often tragic pattern in the human story. These conflicts live on in the collective memory, cautionary tales. They remind us of the fragility of peace and the immense effort required to maintain it. Only by looking into this darkness can we hope to navigate the future and work toward a world where battle is replaced by the quiet work of building lasting peace.